They laughed. The kind of laughter that curdles the air, not from joy, not even from irony, but from something colder, manufactured amusement. Polite derision. A startup's version of dominance. Collective chuckling wrapped in synergy and mockery. I didn't laugh. He had just pointed at my server rack. The one I'd built line by line, part by part, night by night. Who decorated the closet, he said, his laser pointer hovering like a loaded gun. Radio Shack? The joke landed like a tech bros punchline, sloppy but loud. The engineers fake laughed out of habit. The interns laughed earnestly, too green to know better. And Greg Darnell, the new CFO, who had been with us for exactly 3 weeks, flashed that smug, symmetrical grin that came standard with his leather loafers and LinkedIn glow. I stood near the back wall of the all-hands meeting room, coffee cold in my hand, spine straight, mouth still. Greg had walked into this company like a man arriving to flip a switch and claim progress. He brought with him a PowerPoint deck of buzzwords and a scent of oat milk cologne. His credentials were laminated with phrases like margin velocity, operational reinvention, cloud-first architecture. I'd read his onboarding email. The board was thrilled. Fresh eyes, they'd said. New perspective. They didn't need a new perspective. They needed someone who wouldn't accidentally detonate the core system while trying to optimize the coffee budget. I watched as Greg paced confidently in front of the projector screen, highlighting components of the infrastructure like he was appraising garage sale furniture. When his pointer circled my rack, a squat tower of brushed aluminum and midnight fans, I didn't even blink. This little guy here, he continued, has been running for what? A decade? Legacy hardware. Completely redundant. He turned to the crowd. We're spending $2,400 a month to power Amanda's Nostalgia Museum. That drew a roar. A whoop. A whistle. I sipped the bitterness from my cup. Amanda. That was me once, back when there were 6 of us in a rented space above a bike shop, cranking out prototype code under flickering lights. When this company was 2 folding tables and a dream, I built that validator node with secondhand parts and stubbornness. It had never failed. Not once. Now it was a joke. He called it nostalgia, but it wasn't. It was necessity, precision, efficiency, without fluff. That rack housed the real-time validator our cloud infrastructure still couldn't replace without imploding under token drift. But Greg hadn't read the documentation. I knew. I wrote it. 6 versions. Annotated. Flagged. Buried. Ignored. He didn't care. Not really. He saw wires and blinking lights and thought they were just relics waiting to be unplugged. This is the kind of clutter that keeps us from scaling, he said, wrapping the session with that fake leader flourish. Let's streamline the future. He said it like a prophecy. I heard it like a funeral. Back at my desk, Slack lit up with sycophantic echo. Big changes coming. Excited to optimize. Is Claire's rack really that outdated? I answered none of it. I just sat. Logged into the validator one last time. Exported the full activity mirror. Marked one file. Pending. I knew what was coming. I had seen this before 3 CEOs ago, during the great agile transformation that derailed half our team. I had watched systems rot from the inside because someone with an MBA thought redundancy meant inefficiency instead of resilience. I had survived long enough to learn. When they laugh at the thing you built, the next thing they reach for is the plug. So I had a plan. Of course I had a plan. But I didn't argue. Didn't flinch. They think silence means consent. But sometimes, silence is the sound of the trap locking into place. Greg passed by my desk later that day, still smug from the dopamine of applause. He didn't even see me. Just said, "Appreciate you keeping things humming, Claire." I nodded. Through him. Because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that they hadn't just mocked my work. They had made it necessary to prove them wrong. And proof, well, proof doesn't come in arguments. It comes in absence. It comes when the hum goes quiet, when the validators stop correcting entropy in real time, when the refunds flood in, when customers disappear, and then they'll ask, "What happened?" And someone will say, "She built it." And someone else will whisper, "She warned us." I finished my coffee, packed my bag, and walked out of that building like a ghost exiting her own body. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a decision made by someone who doesn't understand the system they're about to dismantle. It isn't the absence of sound. It's the tension in the air, the way people avert their eyes in the hallway, the sudden overuse of phrases like just curious and quick question in Slack messages. By Tuesday morning, the whispers had become tasks. Greg had scheduled a legacy infrastructure audit, and by noon, it had a Trello board, color-coded, to make it look intentional. My validator rack was now tagged Phase 1, Decommissioning Opportunity. Opportunity. They really love that word. I skimmed the board once, just to see which of the junior engineers had been assigned to assess Claire's rack viability. I didn't blame them. Most of them had never touched real hardware, let alone built something from stripped-down firmware. They lived in the cloud, cradled by APIs, and paid plugins that abstracted every ounce of reality away from their fingertips. And Greg? He couldn't even spell asynchronous without help. But here he was, preparing to rip the spine out of the system like he was removing a paperclip. At 4:47 p.m., the Slack notification came in. Let's move forward with unplugging the validator stack this week. We'll rely on cloud backups as primary from now on. Efficiency equal evolution. Let's not be afraid to grow. I stared at it for exactly 11 seconds. Then, I closed the window. He had no idea what he was unplugging. The validator didn't just confirm transactions. It corrected them. It wasn't a checkpoint. It was a living buffer against chaos. That machine smoothed token drift in real time, patched silent sync issues, adjusted for load imbalances. The new system didn't even know where its own clock was half the time. I had told them. Of course I had. Versioned documentation, memos, a white paper I had written at 2 in the morning during the 2020 holiday crash. I had even titled one section, The Consequences of Overconfidence. Greg skimmed it like a lifestyle blog post. I didn't push. Not anymore. Because when someone is already holding the detonator, shouting won't stop them. It just makes you a target. Instead, I began what I'd always known I might need to do. One terminal. One encrypted external drive. One copy of the validator logs live, annotated, timestamped. The mirror node, still humming in my basement, clean and quiet like a secret. They thought I was sentimental, but I was never clinging to the past. I was preserving the only parachute they didn't know existed. On Thursday, the facilities team arrived with a dolly. One of them was chewing a protein bar like it owed him money. The other sipped from a lime green energy drink and squinted at the label Greg had printed and taped onto the server rack. Decommission. Legacy stack. Legacy. Funny word. In this place, it meant old, unnecessary, too attached. In my world, it meant dependable, battle-tested, alive. I stood in the corner, arms crossed, invisible, watching. They unhooked the power cables like they were pulling holiday lights out of a drawer. No reverence, no idea, just compliance. Greg's name was on the work order. I saw it in bold, black font. They wheeled the rack out like it was junk furniture headed for a storage unit. One of them bumped the frame into the door frame on the way out. No apology, no awareness. And that was that. 8 years of uptime, silenced. I didn't stop them. I didn't even blink. Because the moment they unplugged it, they also unplugged something else. Their illusion of control. I went home early that day. Nobody stopped me. HR wasn't sure if I was resigning, taking leave, or just working remotely. I told them nothing. Some systems run best in the background, and some moves are only visible once the damage appears. But I knew one thing. The moment they pulled that plug, they didn't just disconnect a machine. They disconnected their future from stability. And they did it with a smile. The sound of silence. They rolled it out just past 8:47 in the morning. I remember the time, because I checked the clock instinctively, the way you do when something irreversible happens, like a door slamming shut behind you, or the last line of code crashing mid-deploy. 2 guys from facilities, one wearing a hoodie too clean to have ever touched a data cable, the other with a granola bar clenched between his teeth, like he was in a hurry to be somewhere that didn't require understanding what his hands were about to destroy. The taller one muttered something under his breath as he traced the cords. Unplug the nostalgia stack, and I swear I felt the air in the room tighten around my ribs. Nostalgia. That word again. Like this was a forgotten attic of sentimental junk, not the single most vital system quietly ensuring we didn't bleed out transaction errors like a severed artery. I watched from the corner, silent, still, no protest, no plea, arms folded like I was at a funeral for a language only I had ever spoken fluently. They gripped the rack like movers wrangling a couch off Craigslist, yanked the power leads one by one, the LED lights fading like dying stars, the fan slowing to a stop with a sigh that landed somewhere in the cavity of my chest. When the last light went out, so did 8 years of breath. I said nothing. I kept my fists in my pockets, not to appear calm, but because if I didn't, the tremble in them might have betrayed the magnitude of restraint I was holding. Not fear, precision. Rage held at absolute zero, waiting for conditions to align. The plan had already begun. No, it had been in motion long before Greg ordered the unplug. The night before, while he was probably polishing his keynote slides and watching YouTube videos on executive presence, I had sat in my home office under the low hum of my mirror node, fingers dancing across the keys like a surgeon prepping for an operation no one would see coming. I had crafted a secure data capsule, tiny, ruthless, complete, housed on a thumb drive, sealed with biometric lock, and encrypted with a passphrase I hadn't spoken out loud in over 3 years. The contents were surgical. Validator override keys, back-end recovery protocols, a fully annotated log of every system-level change since launch. No drama, just truth, wrapped in elegance and code. The last line I typed. Initiate failsafe protocol 9XO. I didn't execute it. That would have been an act of war. I simply laid the match beside the fuse and walked away. I drafted a note to legal, not a threat, not even a warning, just a log. A breadcrumb. The kind of message that gets ignored until it becomes prophecy. By the time I returned to my desk that morning, I had packed up the last of my plants into a cloth tote, slid my onboarding documents into a plain manila folder, and left a single red envelope marked, "If found, please return to Claire D." Inside was a dead USB stick from 2014 and a bent paperclip, just enough to confuse someone who might be stupid enough to think chaos comes with flashing lights and sirens. Tanya from HR blinked when I passed her desk. She didn't ask if I was quitting. I didn't clarify. The elevator was full, so I took the back stairwell, the same one I used when we went live for the first time. Back then, the validator wasn't even in a rack. It was 2 milk crates, a fan from my garage, and half a roll of duct tape. Back then, people gave a damn. Back then, nobody laughed at the hum of code running so tight it could shave milliseconds off an authentication loop. Now, it was gone. Removed like a bad habit. But I wasn't afraid. Panic is a luxury for the unprepared. I had a mirror node, humming 3 feet from my kitchen table, shielded from noise, temperature, and stupidity. I had logs, timestamps, integrity checks. I had a home-built fortress of logic and consequence. And soon, very soon, they would have a reckoning. The leak begins. It started, as all things do in tech, with something no one wanted to own. A help desk ticket timestamped, polite, easily dismissed, reporting a refund processed twice for a single canceled order. Then another. Then 6 more. Different customers, different states, all within a 2-hour window. At first, the support team brushed it off with the usual script. We're escalating this to engineering, which really means we hope it fixes itself before someone with power notices. But it didn't fix itself. Refund queues backed up like a clogged artery, and still no one pulled the alarm. Instead, they invoked the sacred gods of outsourced IT, a vendor 3 time zones away, fluent in buzzwords, allergic to accountability. Their diagnosis? Regional congestion, possible DNS latency, maybe a failover node syncing improperly. Their fix? Purge session cache, restart microservices. Classic tech support bingo. Meanwhile, the order pipeline had begun to cough. Transactions stuck in pending. Payment tokens timing out. Customers refreshing for hours before giving up and buying elsewhere. The dashboard, of course, insisted all systems were operational. Corporate theater at its finest. On Friday morning, Greg dropped into the daily stand-up like he was still auditioning for a TED Talk. Fresh haircut, teeth glowing like he swallowed a ring light. "So, we've had a little turbulence," he said, smirking. "But everything's under control, right?" He laughed. No one joined him, not even the interns. I watched from home, earbuds in, coffee lukewarm, my dog curled up beside the mirror node humming softly like a hymn. Greg's voice, chirping from the Zoom call, sounded like static mixed with smugness. Every syllable was a match dragging across sandpaper. He didn't know. Not yet. What none of them understood was that the validator rack wasn't just a database appendage. It was a correction engine, smoothing out asynchronous token drift, fixing tiny time errors before they bloomed into chaos. You know how a coin spun fast looks still? That was what my system did to the transaction flow. Stabilized entropy into silence. Without it, token IDs aged too fast. Timeouts overlapped. Refunds doubled. Data began to decay, not from bugs, but from sheer mathematical inevitability. At my kitchen table, I watched the logs accumulate flagged anomalies, stacking like termites in drywall. One here, three more there. The quiet before collapse. By midday, the revenue reports showed a 6% variance between captured payments and confirmed orders. Still, within tolerance, Greg said, because he didn't understand that variance is exponential. He ended the meeting early to focus on deliverables, which I'm sure meant texting a college roommate who once built a Shopify plugin. I didn't gloat. I never do. There's no satisfaction in watching a building you warned them about catch fire. Just inevitability. Just the slow unfolding of math. And this math whispered one thing. The validator wasn't optional. It had been holding them up, silently, for years. Without it, the cracks became chasms. The logs told the story no one wanted to hear. The leak had begun. Not loudly, not with sirens, but with the quiet elegance of precision coming undone. The cost of ignoring. The first real explosion came not from a system, but from a person, Ethan Myers, our newest hire, fresh out of grad school, with a brain like a freshly sharpened blade, and the kind of idealism that hadn't yet been sanded down by corporate varnish. He flagged the anomaly like a good engineer would. Detailed report, line-by-line timestamps, labeled urgent and infracritical. His subject line was poetic in its own way. Token loop mismatch. I read it from my mirror node, watching the words trail across the screen like a postmortem signed in real time. "It looks like the backup validator isn't compensating for asynchronous drift," he wrote. "Time-stamped discrepancies are cascading. We're stacking unclosed transactions." He even ran a simulation. God bless him. Showed how the order queue was creating phantom loops echoes of transactions that looked real but never finalized, like footprints in wet cement. It was beautiful, clear, precise. A distress call disguised as logic. It should have been a turning point. It wasn't. Greg read the message in the morning sync and called it fear-mongering. Said Ethan was spreading unnecessary drama and disrupting team morale. That's what he called it, morale. As if morale was the thing bleeding money. 10 minutes later, Ethan's access was revoked. No warning, no HR rep, just a Slack notification. "Thanks for your service." His email signature disappeared mid-keystroke. Another loose thread snipped before it could pull apart the carefully woven blanket Greg had tucked his ego into. I sat at my kitchen desk, hands still, coffee gone cold, watching, not reacting, because Ethan was right, and he was gone. That was the moment I knew they had entered the fall. Not the stumble. The fall. It was no longer about drift or refunds. This was about blindness weaponized by pride. So I sent the message. Not to Greg, not to PR, not to the team chat where emojis were still being used to rate lunch options. I sent it to legal, a soft, surgical little note routed through a secure third-party relay. No threat. No demand. Just a subject line. Protocol Echo 9. Inside, 3 references. Logline 45 to 78. Patch notes V2.7b. Suggested reading immediate. It wasn't public knowledge. Echo 9 was the failsafe protocol I embedded deep into the system architecture 3 years ago, documented, approved, ignored. It outlined exactly what would happen if someone disabled the primary validator node without compensatory real-time correction. In short, this. I didn't break a rule. I didn't even touch the system. I let the notes speak, because sometimes the truth is louder when whispered. Legal didn't reply. They rarely do. But I knew someone read it. I imagined the junior attorney squinting at their monitor, cross-referencing the logs, the backdated memos, the silence in the replies. That's when things began to shift. Engineering started running in triage mode. The sales team asked for manual overrides. Refunds were being processed faster than orders. Greg, meanwhile, was nowhere. Probably off-site. Probably on the phone with someone who once scaled a payment platform in Europe. It didn't matter. The logs were bleeding. I hadn't pulled a trigger. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply stopped holding the line. And now, they were finally starting to notice that gravity doesn't care who let go first. If you've ever been punished for being right too soon, if you've ever watched someone younger, braver, more honest, get pushed out for speaking the truth, this chapter was written for you. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a strategy. Sometimes it's the last calm breath before the system you warned them about finally collapses. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever been Ethan or Claire, or both, drop your story below. We're building more than a channel here. We're writing a ledger of warnings unheeded. Let's make sure they're remembered. The numbers lie. By Friday morning, the dashboards had started to lie, not just softly statistically, but violently, contradicting one another like a panel of experts paid to disagree. Sales was reporting a $1.48 million day. Accounting said it was $1.31 million. Marketing, high off a promo campaign they'd launched without warning anyone, swore we had crossed $1.53 million and had already triggered a Slack emoji parade to celebrate. But then, someone pulled up the refund, total $1.97 million, and the air in the virtual room went thin. No one could explain it. There were no chargebacks, no flagged fraud, just a spreading mess of ghost revenue and digital IOUs that no one could reconcile. Like the company was haunted by transactions that weren't real, or worse, were too real, and slipping through our fingers. It was Linda from accounting who broke first. She was always the quiet one, undercaffeinated, overworked, too tired to pretend she was fine. In the team chat, she typed, "Are we making money or hemorrhaging it? Because QuickBooks says we're doing both." The reply came not from finance, but from customers. Complaints flooded in. Stuck orders, double charges, refunds for things never purchased. One guy threatened to report us to the Better Business Bureau and his cousin at Channel 8. I bookmarked that one. He felt like a man of follow-through. Then came the dev ticket, the one that lit the fuse. Ethan was gone, but his shadow remained. A junior developer named Priya, just 3 months in, submitted a red-flagged report to engineering with the words, "Transaction Pipeline Divergence" in the title. I read her full write-up from the mirror node. She was good. She saw the same thing Ethan had, just with more fear in her language. "It looks like state confirmation is failing on Echo transactions," she wrote. "Refund loops are triggering default protocols without back-end closure. We're issuing money without verifying if we ever received it." In plain English, the company was giving away cash for problems it didn't understand, while sales figures kept lying louder and louder. Greg finally showed up in the Friday all-hands. He looked pale, tight-jawed, like he hadn't slept. Or worse, like he had, and realized the dream was a lie. "We're experiencing minor turbulence," he said, that phrase again, like we were all passengers on a plane he wasn't qualified to fly. "Nothing alarming, just some syncing issues. We're in control." He said it like a spell, as if saying, "in control," enough times would make it true. He even made a joke, something about the cloud needing a reboot and a hydration break. No one laughed. Someone coughed. I watched him from my kitchen, tea steaming in my mug, dog asleep on the rug. My mirror system displayed the raw numbers, the deltas, the loops, the failures streaming in from the chaos they'd unleashed. And I thought, not for the first time. This isn't a crisis. It's a reckoning. The system wasn't broken. It was finally showing them the consequences of ignoring the architecture holding it together. The validator hadn't failed. It had been removed. And now, they were flying blind, trusting numbers that smiled at them while bleeding beneath the surface. But I didn't say a word. Because numbers don't lie. People do. The weekend collapse. It happened at 11:42 a.m. On Saturday, in the middle of the company's heavily advertised weekend blitz sale, the one marketing had hyped across 4 states, 2 influencer podcasts, and a full bus wrap in downtown Phoenix. We had slashed prices by 40%, stacked promotions like unstable Jenga towers, and expected a flood of transactions that would carry us through the quarter. Instead, we hit the switch, and nothing happened. No order confirmations. No thank you for your purchase emails. No revenue counters ticking upward like casino lights. Just the sound of digital silence, the cold, flat heartbeat of a system that had finally given up pretending. Customers clicked "Buy Now" and watched spinning wheels loop into oblivion. One woman posted a screenshot of her cart, frozen for 23 minutes, with a caption that read, "Is this part of the sale or a psychological experiment?" Another influencer, a fitness guy named Tyvon, with a six-pack that should be registered as a public asset, posted a video where he stared silently into the camera, then whispered, "They scammed us." It got 500,000 views in 3 hours. His caption, "Number blitz fail, number not sponsored anymore." Refunds began triggering automatically, not because anyone approved them, but because the system couldn't confirm the charge state and defaulted to customer protection protocols. $600,000 in misfired refunds processed within the first 2 hours. Then the internal dashboards froze. At exactly 12:03 p.m., the numbers stopped, stuck like a clock tossed into a pond, drowned in silence. Slack threads turned into horror movie transcripts. Can someone confirm if the bridge is down? There's no bridge. The logs are intact, just empty. Greg tried to reassure the teams, called it momentary turbulence again, said, "The cloud just needs to hydrate." I swear on my life he used those exact words. Somewhere in legal, someone started asking about Protocol Echo 9 again. One of them accidentally CC'd me in a reply. I didn't respond. There was no need. By 1:27 p.m., I got a text from Kwame, one of the only engineers left who remembered the early days. No greeting. Just, "Did you know this was coming?" I stared at it for a moment, then typed 3 words. They unplugged it. That was all. No gloating, no threat, just a statement of fact. Because that's what this had always been. Not revenge, not sabotage, just cause and effect. They pulled the spine out of the system and expected it to stand. They cut the brake lines and blamed the hill. And me? I was baking banana bread, barefoot, watching logs collapse in real time while the scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen. Every failed session, every ghost refund, every cart lost to limbo, pinged my mirror node like a symphony of confessions. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because failure was inevitable once they removed the one thing they didn't understand. They had mocked the validator. Now they were learning what it had protected them from. Call her back. The message came not from Greg, not from anyone with a title that had been glowing in signatures all week, but from Rachel Marchand, our crisis PR fixer, the kind of woman whose voice sounded like silk-lined steel and whose emails arrived with punctuation so sharp you could feel it through the screen. She left a voicemail first, impossibly polite, the kind of courtesy that bends slightly under pressure. "Claire, we'd love to explore a potential strategic conversation regarding temporary advisory support," she said, as if the company hadn't been hemorrhaging credibility for 48 hours. Translation: the house was on fire, and they finally remembered I'd been holding the extinguisher. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, walked the dog, watched the sun climb the sky like it owed me something. When I sat down to reply, I didn't write a greeting. No preamble, just terms. A 3-month retainer, paid in full upfront. Full administrative access, no oversight. I choose my own hours, my own tools, and I decide who I speak to or don't. One final clause. Greg Darnell is removed publicly by Monday. No transition. No vague exit memo. His badge deactivated, his Slack profile grayed out, and no longer authorized to utter the word streamline in this building. 4 hours later, the contract arrived. Signed, sealed, no red lines. Non-negotiation. Just one line added at the bottom. Welcome back, Claire. Thank you. Pathetic. The next morning, I arrived at 8:01 a.m. Not because I needed to, but because I knew the early crowd would see it. Same parking spot, same boots, same ID badge, though now it buzzed with a different weight. The lobby was quiet. That post-storm hush that lingers after something breaks, and no one wants to be the first to speak. The receptionist, once endlessly chatty about my scarves, just looked away. Engineers nodded awkwardly. HR watched from behind glass like I was a wild animal wandering back into territory it had once ruled. I didn't blame them. I walked past Greg's old office. The blinds were shut. His chair faced the window. A half-empty protein shake sat sweating on the desk. His nameplate was gone. Just a faint outline remained, like a tombstone someone tried to erase. On the monitor, someone had left a sticky note with 3 words in thick black Sharpie. Plug it back. I didn't smile. I kept walking. Straight to the server room, the one they'd converted into multi-purpose storage after ripping out the validator. The lights were off. The air still smelled faintly of metal and regret. I opened the cage. Everything was still there, just unplugged. Like a cathedral, with no choir. I knelt down, slid the power connector into place, and waited. The hum returned slowly, like a held breath exhaled. No speech, no audience, just alignment. Validator syncing with my mirror node, like 2 old friends reuniting after a long silence. I checked the logs. Drift correction initiated. Refund queue halted. Sales queue rebalanced. Not hours. Minutes. It hadn't needed fixing. It had needed remembering. And now, it remembered who built it. The validator came online at exactly 8:19 a.m. No countdown, no ceremony, no collective gasp from the floor above, just the soft click of power, a blink of LEDs, and the return of that low rhythmic hum that used to lull me through nights of crisis. Within 90 seconds, the mirror nodes recognized the restored authority. Within 5 minutes, token drift corrected across all layers. 10 minutes in, the sales engine exhaled. Transactions flowing like water over pipes long clogged with arrogance. Refund queues thinned like fog in morning sun. Promo codes reconciled. Carts cleared. Confirmation loops blinked to life with surgical precision. The validator didn't need convincing. It simply obeyed. The system hadn't needed fixing. It had needed to be reminded. And now, it remembered who built it. Upstairs, the board must have seen the metrics light up in real time because someone leaked a screenshot of the revenue dashboard into a private Slack thread titled Q3 Miracle. One entry stood out. Subject: Claire just plugged it back in. The message went viral internally in seconds. Someone turned it into a meme. Greg's face photoshopped onto a Roomba with the caption, "Streamlined this." By noon, Greg's access was revoked. His calendar wiped. A single-sentence email went company-wide. Effective immediately, Greg Darnell has been relieved of his duties as Chief Financial Officer. No farewell, no fruit basket. Just a void where ego used to be. Rumors spread he tried blaming vendor negligence until legal pulled the patch logs with his signature approving the unplug order. Others said he was last seen in the parking lot screaming into his AirPods about CFO cancel culture. It didn't matter. He unplugged it. That's all anyone remembered. And me? I stayed late. Not for them. Not for glory. Just to sit. I pulled a folding chair from the hallway, set my thermos on the floor, and sat beside the validator like I had hundreds of nights before. No one disturbed me. No one dared. I sipped lukewarm tea, and watched the logs scroll stable, aligned, unquestioning. The validator thrummed beside me like a living thing, brutal, blameless, brilliant. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. If you've ever kept something alive in silence, if you've ever carried systems on your back while louder people took credit, made jokes, then broke the very thing they mocked, you already understand this moment. You don't owe them a monologue. You don't owe them rage. You just owe the truth its moment to hum again. And if you've ever sat beside a machine, a mission, a body of work they never understood, drop your story. Because here, your silence was never weakness. It was architecture. The hallway lights flickered a little as I left the server room, just enough to remind me that even in moments of restoration, systems don't forget their trauma. No one waited outside, no applause, just the hum of climate control and the faint sound of keyboards somewhere on the upper floor, soft, uncertain, like people trying not to make noise inside a place that had just buried something. I walked past the open workstations. The usual buzz was absent. Slack channels were ghost towns. Jira tickets frozen mid-comment. The help desk backlog now read like a war diary. Refund notes. Apology emails. Questions no one had the courage to answer. And the silence deeper now, heavier, settled across the floor like fog. No one knew how much money we'd lost. Not really. By the time the forensic audit came in, the damage was already an abstraction. The firm, cold, efficient, paid by the hour like surgeons, didn't ask questions. They followed logs, timestamp trails, access records, packet flows. After 19 hours of tracing the collapse backward, they delivered their verdict like a blade. The backups weren't backups. They were mirrors. Partial, incomplete, dependent on real-time correction. Without the original validator, the systems had been flying blind from the moment Greg gave the order. Token drift started by milliseconds, grew to seconds, became unrecoverable. Transactions authorized against expired tokens. Refunds triggered by phantom states. Orders duplicated. Promos lost. Everything spiraling in beautiful, silent math. But the worst part wasn't what failed. It was what had held everything together for so long. In the logs, the audit team found something else. Daily entries, timestamp corrections, drift patches, manually pushed, line by line, under an admin key labeled Aorist Avid. No cron jobs, no automation, just hands, mine, every morning, every night. For years, I never put it in a KPI, never brought it up in meetings. I wasn't doing it for recognition. I did it because it had to be done. And Greg, he finally got it. 8 p.m., midweek, long after HR had gone home. Someone saw him pacing the empty office barefoot in a stained dress shirt, holding one of the old backup drives like it might whisper forgiveness. He mumbled it then. To no one. Maybe to the vending machine. We unplugged the validator. And that was the moment. Not when the revenue fell. Not when the refunds triggered. But when the person responsible finally realized what they had removed wasn't just hardware, it was memory. That same week, legal surfaced the trail 3 years of emails, internal memos, deck slides titled things like Validator Load Limits Under Drift and Redundancy versus Reliance. All stamped. All marked red. All ignored. One stood out. Sent the 3rd of March, 11:14 a.m. Subject: Critical validator dependency. Please confirm we are aligned on continuity strategy before any decommissioning. Status: marked read. No reply. There would be no saving him now. But I didn't lift a finger. The call didn't come from the CEO. It came from Rachel, again. A second message. Colder this time. We'd like to reframe the original agreement. Would you consider ongoing oversight? I didn't answer. Not immediately. I made breakfast. Took the dog out. Let them marinate. Then I replied with new terms. Not out of ego, but because once someone tries to erase you, clarity becomes a condition. They agreed to all of it. Every line. No edits. Just a single addition at the bottom. Welcome home. I ignored it. I arrived at 8:01 again. Same spot, same silence. I walked back to the server room. It was different now. No more storage clutter. Someone had cleaned. The floor gleamed. The cable paths were taped down with reverence. And on the wall, someone had drawn a quiet little note in marker, under a vent. She didn't reboot it. She just plugged it back in. I sat down again, folding chair in the corner. Same thermos. Same logs. Validator, purring like a cat that never left. It didn't blink. Didn't wait for praise. It simply did its job. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and let the hum carry me. Because I didn't need closure. I just needed the machine to remember. And it did. They thought it was decoration. I knew it was detonation.